So a year ago, it felt as if there were these dark clouds coming in, and we didn't know where they were quite coming from. In fact, the senior staff of the diocese, the 10 of us, were due to have our annual residential, and we were going to London, to East London, to have that time together for planning and prayer and also to have some joy together as a team. And I pulled the plug on that on the previous Saturday, much to the annoyance of some who thought, what the heck's he doing? He's making a big fuss out of nothing. But by the Tuesday of that week, we were having our first COVID response meeting. And the mood of the country was changing very, very fast. There was a final choral evensong in the cathedral with the girls' choir. And there were a lot of people there. And I was asked to give the blessing at the end, which I did. And I remember in that blessing I said, until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. And I really struggled to get to the end of the blessing because tears were coming down my face and I was a bit embarrassed. So I turned and went out in the procession at the end, but I just knelt with the Bishop of Lynn before the high altar in the cathedral, and streams of tears, because the kind of enormity of this decision that we should close for public worship. And we didn't know for how long, though there was the optimistic view, it'll only be for 3 or 4 weeks, but kind of in my heart of hearts, I knew this would be for a lot longer than that. And the world would somehow change. What we knew of what it was to live together was going to change, and we didn't know quite what that would entail or be. In fact, I haven't hugged my mum for over a year. Only seen her once this year, socially distanced. My parents live in Scotland. That I'd just love to give her a big hug. So many people would. Yeah, my son was on his gap year in the Gambia, and we needed to get him home. And the organisation he was there with were being a bit slow. And actually, we got him out before the rest of the team got out, because they were determined to stay. And we got him out on a repatriation flight. That was quite anxious making. Our daughter started homeschooling. My wife, who's a GP, was looking at what she could do. There was a sense for many of us, who could this impact? I was sent very confidential instructions about the mass burial of the dead in open pits. We were talking and planning for what then became the mortuary, temporary mortuary for Norfolk. There was a real sense of foreboding in the air as to what this was going to look like. And it's easy now to look back in hindsight and say, oh, why did we make those decisions? And yes, we made mistakes. Of course we made mistakes. But actually the mood music was very, very serious. And that might not have been known by the wider public, but that's what I was dealing with at the time. I was absolutely clear about a few things, though. Right from day one, I was absolutely clear that the church needs to talk of living hope, that we need to be hopeful in this situation. I was very, very clear that we had to follow national advice as a church, that we needed to continue to pray, that we needed to prioritise the pastoral care. And goodness, we saw a fantastic mobilisation of the care of the isolated and the lonely and feeding hungry people that the church has done across Norfolk and Waveney. And finally, I really felt that priority needed to be around keeping each other safe and being kind to each other. And I think those different areas that I wrote about and spoke about a year ago have really lasted the course. None of them are irrelevant now. They are all important, being about living hope, following guidance, continuing to pray, keeping each other safe and being kind, and prioritising pastoral care. Each of those 5 areas have continued to be sort of watchwords in the diocese. And I think where I've seen churches do well has been where they've kept around those areas. And goodness, what a revolution there was in digital worship, online worship. Within just a few weeks, people transformed so much of what they were doing. But there was also great loss, huge sense of loss of churches are places where people come with their stuff, the stuff they don't know what to do with. And our churches being closed, which, was probably a mistake. People didn't know where to take the stuff they don't know what to do with. And if I had that time again, I would say that our churches should have remained open for private prayer and for clergy to say their prayers in. But at the time we were following government advice, stay at home, protect the NHS. And that's why that decision was made. And indeed the government said that church buildings had to close. The church in Norfolk, goodness me, they stepped up to the plate. They really, really did. I've been very defensive of clergy when people have said that hasn't happened. Yeah, no, I suppose in some places it might not have done. But overall, our clergy and lay leaders have been incredible in this last year. They're exhausted now. They're tired. We've all lived through this collective trauma together. But they've kept on going, kept on worshipping God and loving their neighbours. And I am daily inspired by that. So the different examples that I hear from around the county, from Heacham, where there's a whole programme of delivering medicine from the pharmacy, and it's continued for a year now, out to vulnerable people, run by the church, offering support. Our most isolated rural communities, partnering with their church schools in providing weekly groceries and food for struggling families. In Galston, the vicar there stepping up to the plate with a whole group of people in providing for the need of people who live in poverty there. Projects all over the diocese, people loving their neighbours, reaching out to the isolated, phoning people, going and knocking on doors and just checking on people are okay and standing at a distance, and so that actually some of our most isolated people have somebody to talk to in their week. I'd only been Bishop of Norwich for 9 months when all this kicked off, so I had a sense of mourning and loss and not being able to get out and about in our parishes and see the work we do and support people in a physically present way. That I found immensely hard. I think I've had to face issues of death and my own mortality and the mortality of those I love more than I probably had done in the past, and to ask questions of, what would it be like if so-and-so was no longer here? How do I protect myself and those I love? And there's been various things around leadership during a pandemic of trying to keep a sense of proportion when it's so easy to either do one of two things. Either you become terribly optimistic and say, it doesn't really matter, or you become terribly pessimistic and think the world's going to end and we can't do anything. So it's trying to keep a steady emotion when sometimes within oneself you can feel very different emotions. And to try to live and lead from a place of hopeful realism. Because ultimately, my hope is found in Jesus Christ, and I believe that God has been in the darkest moments of this pandemic, that we as Christians are not bringing light into situations, that God is already there in the darkest of places and the deepest of struggles. And my role, however badly I do it as a Christian leader and as bishop to this area, is to hold that candle of hopeful realism. So, and by that I mean being honest about where we are and the things that we face as a society, but being hope-filled. And for me, hope is love stretched into the future. And I'm really interested in the conversations that I'm having about what that future could look like. And I know it's becoming a bit of a cliche of a saying, but how we build back better. Because the old way of doing things was not good for us. It was not good for our bodies and our souls or for the planet. And I'm fascinated in this question of how can we create a society as a community, live as individuals in a way that is actually better for us and better for the planet and better for our relationships one with another, how we hold those we love tighter, but also let them go.